Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another video from inside the Eve Echo's final test. Today I thought I'd go back to basics and talk about the three main turret types in New Eden, which is to say railguns, lasers, and cannons. A lot of people have been asking, how do you know what range these are, what do the stats all mean, that kind of thing, so that's what we're going to go over in this video. We're going to have a look at different turrets and discuss what they mean, how they operate, and what the differences between the types are. Now, missiles and drones are both very different in how they operate, so rather than complicate matters here, those two will have their own separate video where we go over the stats and have a look at how those operate. Anyway, before we jump in, if you do enjoy this video or find it useful, let me know by hitting like on it and subscribe to the channel for all things Eve Echoes. Ding that notification bell as well to make sure that you know when the next video goes live. If you've got a particular topic you'd like to see me cover, or a question you'd like me to answer in a video, do let me know either by commenting down below in the comment section, by finding me on social media like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, or indeed come and find us on the Catskull Cartel Discord. There are public channels open to everyone, not just corporation members, where you can come, you can ask questions, seek help, and just chat all things Eve Echoes. Now, of course, as well, if you want to go that extra mile and help support this channel, you can do so by coming over and finding me on Patreon. Every single dollar really helps keep this channel going, and it's always incredibly humbling that you guys want to help support. It does really help me an awful lot, so thank you ever so much to every single one of you who've pledged anything to support this channel. It's a really, really huge help. Anyway, that said and done, let's jump in and have a discussion about turrets. Now you'll see here that there are 6 different turrets, which are 3 different types. We've got both long and short range railguns in the top left, long and short range lasers in the top right, and long and short range cannons at the bottom. And we're going to start actually by looking at the cannons, because these are a little bit simpler than the other two. They've just got a couple of stats that the others, a couple of stats missing that the others have, so we can start with those and then move up to the others. Now, as I said, every type of turret in the game has a long and a short range version. In the case of Minmatar, they're cannons, auto cannons are the short range, and strike cannons are the long range. Now, if you long press on any module, you will then come to this page here. This is your basic info page, and it'll tell you everything you need to know about these different items and modules. Now you can see this is a Mark V small autocannon. You'll notice that actually all of these are Mark V, and they are all small. Small means it's usually fitted to a frigate or a destroyer, whereas medium is cruisers and battleships take large. This just means that when we're looking at these are all comparable. They're all Mark V smalls. They're just straight up. You can look at the stats and see how those operate next to each other. Anyway, so the small autocannon. This first thing at the top here is damage types. From left to right, the blue lightning bolt is electromagnetic, red is thermal, white is kinetic, and the orange one on the far right is explosive. Now, basically, these are just different types of damage that weapons can do in the game. You'll tend to find that electromagnetic and thermal weapons deal better damage, they get through better to shields, they'll deal more damage to shields, whereas kinetic and explosive will deal more to armor. Now, there are exceptions to that, but that's the general rule. So here with a small autocannon, you can see these do a decent amount with the 8 kinetic and 12 explosive. That's going to be very powerful against armor, whereas the thermal does help it get through shields that little bit as well. It's a very good, well-rounded turret. Tech level and meta level. Tech level is the basic required tech level you need to be at. Being a Mark V, it's tech level 5. Meta level is just, is it a basic, really crappy one, or is it a little bit better? It's kind of like the rarity. We don't need to worry too much about those two stats. Power grid requirement. This is how much of your ship's power grid output is used by this turret. That obviously means when you combine all of your modules on a ship, they cannot exceed that ship's power grid output. Here you can see it doesn't require much at all. Small autocannons don't require much space on your ship to fit. They are very light on the power grid. Now and then next you have activation time. Activation time, when you activate a module, you'll see it gets that blue line that goes around the outside and fills up, and it does its activation, and then it'll go around again and again and again and again. Basically, in regards to a cannon or a turret, each activation is a single shot. So a 4-second activation time means that this turret shoots once every 4 seconds. Then we come down, I'm going to skip optimal range and accuracy fall off for now, and we're going to go straight down to single hit damage. That basically is how much damage in optimal situations this turret will do per hit. So every 4 seconds, if everything's perfect, if your target's not moving, if you're at optimal range, etc., if everything is perfect, every 4 seconds you will do 74.78 damage with this turret. Of course, nothing is ever perfect, and that's where the other stats come in, starting with tracking speed. Tracking speed is ultimately how quickly your turret can swivel left, right, up and down, how well it can actually stay pointed at a target. Now, if you imagine you're in a car that is driving down a motorway, if you were to point your gun out of a window, any car that's driving alongside you in the same direction is going to be easy to hit. Whereas anything going in the opposite direction, if you can only point out of your side window and you know there's a car going to be whizzing past, it's going to be much harder to hit. You need to be able to track it much faster, aiming from left to right and following it. It's much harder to track. You need a fast tracking speed on your turret. Now, of course, if you are in a car chasing another car down the motorway and you happen to be standing out the sunroof pointing the gun, then that car in the distance isn't actually moving at all. If you're both going at, say, 80 kilometers down the same road, then that car's not moving. Tracking isn't required. That's what tracking speed is. It's how well your gun can stay pointed at the enemy ship. And of course, a fast-moving ship, and when I say fast-moving, I mean fast-moving relative to your position, ultimately requires a faster tracking speed. This means that longer-range turrets tend to not have as high tracking because they just don't need to move as much, because the ships aren't moving at a relative velocity as quickly as you are if you're at close range here, like with a small autocannon, so it's got a very fast tracking speed. Okay, that said and done, let's talk about optimal range and accuracy fall-off. Now you'll see here that these are very short range numbers. Optimal range is, as it suggests, it's the range at which your weapons are optimal. If you are sitting at 1.2 kilometers with a Mark V small autocannon, you are at optimal range. Your gun is 100% effective. Obviously, as I said, the target's movement speed and their signature radius, how difficult they are to hit, is going to affect things, but your guns at least are at 100% effectiveness. Now, accuracy fall-off. This accuracy fall-off is a 50% reduction on optimal. For each distance of an accuracy fall-off, you drop by 50%. This means that, for example, in this case, at 1.2 kilometers, you are 100% effective with those turrets. At an additional 5.16 kilometers, that reduces down to 50%. In this case, then, that's if you add those two together, that gives you a total of 6.36 kilometers. At 6.36 kilometers, you are going to be at 50. Your weapons are going to be 50% effective. At an additional accuracy fall-off, 5.16, so from that 6.36, we're going to add another 5.16, so that's now 11.76, 11.82. At 11.82 kilometers, that is now going to be down to 0% effectiveness. If you think of optimal range as up to where your guns are 100% effective, and each accuracy fall-off is the distance beyond the optimal range, that it is reduced by 50%. So one accuracy fall-off goes from 100% down to 50, two accuracy fall-offs is down to 0. And so you can see here, this is a fairly short-range gun, and Minmatar cannons tend to have a very short optimal range, but then a long accuracy fall-off. They fall off gradually. So let's have a look now at the strike cannon. This is the long-range variant. Again, tech level 5, meta level 2, the damage types are very similar. It does use a bit more power grid, being a longer range cannon. Obviously, it requires a bit more oomph to actually get it across that distance. The activation time of 8.5 seconds is a lot slower, and the single hit damage of 101 as well is not overly great when you work it out by that 8.5. But, of course, you're at range, which means you hopefully are outside of their gun's range. It's a safer position to be in. And you'll see here, tracking speed from 410 on the autocannon has dropped all the way down to 109 on the strike cannon. These track much slower. Again, looking at the optimal range, you can see that's basically 8 kilometers for the optimal range, and the accuracy fall-off is then basically 9 kilometers. That means at 8 kilometers you are 100% effective. The first accuracy fall-off is 8 kilometers plus 9 kilometers, which is 17 kilometers, just under 17 kilometers away. I think it's 16.8 if I'm going to be actually accurate there. 16.8 kilometers, you will have dropped down to 50% effectiveness with the small strike cannons, and then at an additional 8.75 out, so we're now looking at about 24 kilometers, you'll be down to 0% effectiveness. So hopefully you can understand now what optimal range and accuracy fall-off means, and again you can see that Minmatar tend to have a short optimal range, but then a long accuracy fall-off. It's a gradual drop-off. So let's look on the opposite end of the spectrum completely now at the Amarr weapons. Now the small pulse laser is the short-range version of these. And if you look at the damage type on these, you can see straight up, rather than explosive and kinetic with thermal, these are now electromagnetic and thermal. Amarr lasers tend to just cut straight through shields. These do a lot of damage to shields, but they do struggle a bit more against armor tanks because you don't have the kinetic and the explosive, and armor tends to absorb electromagnetic and thermal fairly well. Now, if you look again, power grid requirement here of 9 megawatts. The close range turret here is actually on par with the Minmatar strike cannon for its power grid requirement. It then has an activation time of 4 seconds, on par with the autocannon, and a single hit damage is fairly similar as well at 70.38. Tracking speed is very fast at 384, but it's still not quite the autocannon's 410. But what's this stat up here? Activation cost? Well, yes, whereas a cannon is obviously something that just fires a projectile. In fact, in EVE Online, cannons are just referred to as projectile turrets. Lasers obviously are firing energy, and that energy needs to come from somewhere. In the case of this laser turret, it draws it straight out of your capacitor. So every time you fire it, you do lose 3.4 gigajoules from your capacitor. That means Amarr ships do require a bit larger capacitor in order to function, and they need a larger power grid as well to fit those turrets onto them. Which means if you're going to be running lasers, it's always worth having the engineering skills, like destroyer engineering, frigate engineering, that kind of thing, to have a better capacitor and a better power grid. Now, obviously, that means that with a Minmatar turret, a cannon, if you run out of capacitor, your cannons still fire. With an Amarr ship, if you go down to 0% capacitor, your turrets go offline and you cannot shoot. Now, if we look at the optimal range and the accuracy fall-off on these, you'll see that Amarr are the complete opposite to Minmatar. These have a fairly long optimal range, but then the accuracy fall-off is very short, so that it drops off quickly. In this case, the optimal range is 5.25 kilometers, so 100% effectiveness at 5.25 kilometers, with an accuracy fall-off of 2.5, so that is going to drop very, very quickly. That means here, 100% effectiveness at 5.25, add the accuracy fall-off, which takes us to 7.75, you're now at 50% effectiveness at 7.75 kilometers, an additional 2.5 beyond, so basically 10 kilometers, now takes us to 0. At 5 kilometers, you're at 100% effectiveness. At 10, you're at 0. You see, it's a very quick drop-off, whereas the Minmatar has a longer drop-off to it. Now, if we look at the small beam laser, the beam lasers are the long versions of the turrets, so kind of like the strike cannons. Again, you can see same damage type, electromagnetic with thermal, 5 and 2. Power grid requirement is 11 megawatts. That's quite a big power grid requirement now required to use this, and the activation cost of 6.1 gigajoules is a big punch out of your capacitor. Obviously, that is only firing every 5 seconds, still a lot faster than the strike cannon, but not quite as fast as the pulse laser, meaning this ultimately, 6.1 gigajoules comes off every 5 seconds for a total damage of 72.12 every 5 seconds. Optimal range 11 kilometers, accuracy fall off 2.5. Say it with me, that means 100% effectiveness at 11 kilometers, which very quickly drops to 50% at only 13.5 kilometers, and then once we hit 16 kilometers, you're down to 0. Accuracy fall-off is the rate at which you drop from 100% to 50, and then 50 down to 0. That said and done, now let's move on to the railguns. Railguns are used mainly on Caldari and Galente ships. Now, snub-nosed railguns used to be called blasters. These are now, as it says, snub-nosed railguns. You can see from the damage type, these are mainly kinetic with a bit of thermal. That makes them actually pretty sort of middle ground between the two, whereas laser turrets are very good against shields and not so good against armor, and whereas Minmatar cannons are great against armor, but not so great against shields, these kind of have a middle ground where they're average against both. You've got the kinetic damage there that is going to punch through armor quite nicely, but the thermal damage is still going to help you take down shields. You'll also notice in regards to being a halfway point, they use about halfway between the cannons and the lasers for their power grid requirement, and they do still have an activation cost like lasers, but it is significantly lower than lasers, because it's a projectile being fired like a cannon, but being done so out of a railgun, which requires a bit of energy to push it out the door, so to speak. activation time of 4 seconds, single hit damage of 86.71, you'll see that snub-nosed railguns have some of the highest damage in the game for turrets, but that comes at a significant cost. You can see 4 seconds, 86.71. Let's have a look at that. The DPS there of 21.68 compared to the other smalls of 17.6 and 18.7. So it is significantly higher on the snub-nosed railgun, but the cost comes at the accuracy and the range. In this case, you can see the optimal range is a piddly 1.5 kilometers, and the accuracy fall-off is only 2 kilometers. So 100% effectiveness at 1.5 drops down to 50% effectiveness at 3.5, and is at 0% effectiveness at a piddly 6.5. Snub-nosed railguns are some of the highest damage weapons in the game, but they are also some of the shortest range, which of course means they have a ludicrously high tracking speed because you need to be staying close, and if you're orbiting at a close range, or like staying at approaching at a close range, keeping at range, you are going to have ships moving very quickly relative velocity around you. Now, on the other end of that scale, we have a look at the rifled railguns. These used to just be called railguns, but they are now rifled railguns. These are the long-range versions. Again, same kind of damage types kicking out there. Activation time is still fairly strong at 4 seconds. It's only the strike cannons that are really slowed down, but the rifled railguns still have a decent activation time of 4 seconds. Optimal range is 9 kilometers, accuracy fall-off of 5, so 9, 14, and 19. Those are your points. 100% effectiveness at 9, drops down to 50% effectiveness at 1 accuracy fall-off additional, 9 plus 5 is 14, and then down to 0 at an additional 5 kilometers, so 14 plus 5 is 19 kilometers, that's where you hit 0. Much slower tracking speed and a lower single hit damage, but much longer range. In fact, that 19 kilometers total, I think, actually outmatches everything else. Not quite there. The strike cannon does outrange the railgun, but it does, yeah, it massively outranges the small beam laser, but the rifled railgun is kind of halfway between there. You can see halfway between a beam laser and a strike cannon. And hopefully that now explains how those stats all work. So just to cover that again very quickly, activation cost is how much of your capacitor gets used every time it fires. Activation time is how quickly it fires, so once every 4 seconds it'll activate. The optimal range is the distance at which your guns are 100% effective. The accuracy fall-off is the range beyond the optimal range at which you lose 50% effectiveness, so it drops down to 50 for the first accuracy fall-off and down to 0 at the second accuracy fall-off. Tracking speed is how quickly your turrets actually turn to face their target. Single hit damage is the damage they deal, and power grid requirement is how much of your power grid it takes to actually equip that turret. Anyway, I do hope that covers covers everything that we want to talk about how these weapons work. I hope you understand that bit there. We are now going to have a very quick look at the skills and how these affect. So if we go into weapon technology and look at, say, small laser operation, you'll see that small laser operation increases the damage of your beam lasers there, in regards to damage and their laser tracking speed. If you go into upgrade, you can see as well that that increases damage, accuracy, and optimal range. If you're going to be using a particular weapon type, I do strongly recommend getting both the operation and the upgrade to level 4 before going for that 5th skill point, because if we have a look at how much the 5th skill point costs, you can see level 1 is 250, level 2 is 1,165, level 3 is 6,585, level 4 is 37,255, but then level 5 is suddenly a whopping 210,745. Basically, get every skill to level 4 before going to level 5, because you'll actually see, if we look at what these do level to level, laser damage is 4 at level 1, 8 at level 2, 12 at level 3, 16 at level 4, and then 20 at level 5. So it's only adding an extra 4% for a significantly higher damage, significantly higher skill point investment to get small laser operation to 4 and small laser upgrade to 4 before you come back for the 5. If you're looking at railguns, again, you've got small railgun operation and small railgun upgrade, which do the same kind of thing, up the damage and up the tracking speed, and then the upgrade will up the damage, up the fall-off, and up the range. Same with cannons, you'll have up the damage, up the tracking speed for cannon operation, and cannon upgrade will up the damage, fall-off, and the optimal range. Again, we'll come to missiles, drones, and all of that in future videos, but those will help you there. And it's worth noting, if you've got a ship that, for example, says it gets a bonus of so much for small cannon operation skill, that only applies to the 5 in small cannon operation. Any points you have in advanced small cannon operation do not buff up that bonus. Same with like the upgrade on that. And if a ship says advanced small cannon operation, it's only the skills that you have in advanced small cannon upgrade that will actually hit that there. So anyway, I hope that does now make a bit of sense. I hope those of you who weren't entirely certain about how turrets and that work now have a bit of a clearer understanding on what those weapons actually do. If you do have any questions though, of course, do ask in the comment section down below. Do come and find us on the Catskill Cartel Discord. We'll be more than happy to help, and I will have the missile and the drone variant of this out as soon as possible. Anyway, folks, thank you ever so much for watching. Thank you again for your support. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.